Did I ever tell you to eat up, go to bed, wash your ears, do your homework? No, I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who'd been dead for 500 years in another country. And I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years.
You left just when you were becoming interesting.
Hello and welcome back to the Cine-Files, where we continue our exploration of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When we left Henry Jones Sr. and Henry Jones Jr., they were sitting at a crossroads. And then we cut to Indy, and we look at him in a close-up, and he looks up in the sign, and the camera pushes in on the sign towards Berlin, and then we hear the rising sounds of Nazis, and it's something like the Nuremberg rallies, and we know what the decision is. Again, perfect Stephen Spielberg storytelling. And now we are with the Nazis, man. And it's so funny, like, you know, we had the Nazis in the first movie, then we had no Nazis in the second movie, and now we're right in the heart of Nazi land.
And the similarities are there, right? The idea of if you get this biblical artifact or this religious artifact, they will march onto the world with power.
Yeah.
The Ark was the worry in the first one, the Grail is the worry in the second one, but both reasons are accurate. Right. You know, or both reasons are used here, or the same reason rather is used for both of these things. That if they get it, they're going to march all over the world and be in power. So
Judeo-Christianity really churns out a lot of doomsday MacGuffins.
Yeah. It's funny. So I've been hired to write two. When I first was out of film school, I got hired to write a treatment for, which I ended up doing two different versions of at different times, but it was the 30 pieces of silver.
Oh yeah,
it was Judas's 30 pieces of silver, and one of them would cause evil things to happen. If you ever brought all of them together, then there would be hugely evil. It's actually a good treatment. I wish I had written that screenplay, but I was hired for some horrible thing a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And then for Fred Weintraub, I wrote one that was the spear that pierced Jesus.
Yeah, right. Spear of Destiny.
Yeah, so that was the two that I had written that were of the similar kind of things.
Is that what you used in Constantine? Is that what they're getting? Yeah, the Spear of Destiny.
Yeah. We're in Berlin, and Indy is dressed as a German soldier. And what is going on in the middle of this rally? Burning some books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, the time they start burning books is a scary, scary time as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. And who do we see but Elsa? And how does she feel about the burning of books?
Oh, she's not on board.
No.
It's tragic.
It's tragic.
Ultimately, she's a scholar.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We talked about Belloc in the first movie, is that I think she's a more positive character than he is.
Agreed.
But she is still willing to partner up with horrible people to pursue her ends.
But I think it's almost worse for Belloc because Belloc is a man of age who should know better. This is a young person in the throes of a mania sweeping the country.
Right.
And the other option is death. The other option is complete excommunication from the halls of power. And her access to these artifacts, her access to this historical stuff is made easier by making these uncomfortable moral deals with herself and these Nazis to get to what she ultimately wants, Right. But yes, you're right. They do portray her as someone, and I think her advocating for the Jones boys not to die is also a semblance of empathy for those guys and leads to their escape from that place. So she has that to her, which I think makes her a more interesting character in that way for how she plays.
Well, I think she's definitely an interesting character. I think she doesn't seem to have a horrible objection when we decide that the Jones boys do have to die.
Right.
But, it's like, how often do we as humans allow a thing to go on where we kind of don't like that part of it, but that part over there we kind of do like? And so we go, oh, well, maybe this part isn't so bad.
It's a very good question.
And Jones finds her.
Caroline, Doctor, where is it?
How did you get here?
Where is it? I want it.
And she's shocked by the way that he said, what is he doing here? Like, why would you come all the way here to get the book?
Right.
What is in the book?
My father didn't want it incinerated.
Is that what you think of me? I believe in the Grail, not the swastika.
You stood up to be counted with the enemy of everything that the Grail stands for. Who gives a damn what you think?
You do!
That's a great back and forth.
And his intensity is, I mean, it's powerful. We haven't seen Indiana Jones get angry in this way. The only other time I think is after Marion's supposed death when he's talking to Belloc.
Yeah.
Other than that, he doesn't. I mean, he gets. I have to get what I have to get, but here he's genuinely angry.
Well, he's focused. It's focused anger. Whereas I think in the aftermath of Marion's death, he's a little despondent.
Yeah.
He's drinking. This is he knows exactly what he's doing here.
Right. Plus, she slept with his dad.
Also,
I mean,
there's that.
You can't fault that. And this is an older Jones, right? I mean, chronologically, this is an older Indiana Jones, a couple of years. So, we all know as men, as we get older, we get more crotchety about stuff.
I certainly am more crotchety.
Yeah, that's just how it is.
And particularly when it comes to Nazis.
Yeah, well, sure.
And what is his response? Choke. Hand on her neck, drives her up against the wall, and says, "All I have to do is squeeze."
Now, this has been a contention with us on the Cine-Files, right? You didn't like Harrison Ford pushing in Blade Runner, pushing Sean Young. This is him physically assaulting a woman and slamming her against the wall.
I think we've discussed this 10 times.
I like to bring it up because I think it's a fun
And
discussion.
I don't think you've ever understood my point.
Yeah, I don't know if I have.
Which I don't have any problem with people doing things that are bad in a movie.
Okay.
My problem is what is the viewpoint of the filmmaker that's being expressed?
Well, that's what I'm saying here.
Is that and how can we, if we deconstruct what's happening? We have a person who has tried to kill him,
right?
Who he's in the midst of Nazis, who's holding on to a thing which theoretically is going to help the Nazis conquer the world,
right?
I don't have any problem with him being physical with her. The issue with the Blade Runner thing, when you deconstruct that moment, he is a racist towards replicants in that film.
Right.
And then he gets physical with this person. So it's a question of okay, what is that? In those circumstances, looking at that's a little different.
Right. He's trying to break her down in Blade Runner to make her be honest with him. Right. Is it too far? You can argue that. That's point. And I have always understood your point. It's just I have my scale is different, I guess, when we look at these kinds of things, because I think a woman has to go really, really far in a movie for me to be okay with a physical assault on her, even if this, like with Misery, right? Misery, right. I still got uncomfortable seeing James Caan beat her up with a typewriter at the end of the movie, even though she has ankled him. Yeah. It still bothers me.
Really?
It does. And this scene has always bothered me because I don't think she's a bad person. And the film shows us just a few seconds before, when she looks at the book burning, that she's not a card-carrying, goose-stomping Nazi. And she even says to him, what kind of person do you think I am? So for him to grab her neck and slam him against the wall, you talk about the filmmaker's point of view. We just got the filmmaker's point of view, which is she's not that bad of a person. Well, and so him slamming against the wall to me is a bit... So hard for me is all I'm saying. I'm not right or wrong. I'm just saying it's what I feel.
Well, you are right in your. That's exactly, how you look at things. Here, it's kind of hard to deconstruct this because we're in the midst of. See, I don't think that characters need to be a paragon of virtue for me to watch them in a film. Yeah. And so the question to me is it motivatable that in this moment Indiana Jones does this thing? The answer is 100%. It's motivatable. And then the other thing I have is I think, we're in this world of rethinking about women's roles and men's roles and how we're doing it. And I think that's great. But there is a certain thing where if you say this is how women should be treated in movies and no one should physically attack them ever in a film, you are actually... the word isn't demeaning, but you are limiting them through trying to protect them.
And I don't disagree with you.
You know,
talking about absolutes. I'm not talking about absolutes. This is situational. And to me, I hear you that it is motivatable. The question is, what's the goal here? And did he have to go this route to achieve the goal? And that's my question when I watch this situation. Oh, right. Okay. It's very situational for me.
It's like,
and I want to say just from one last thing, Steve. Sorry, I don't say a man can't hit a woman. I don't say that in movies. If it makes sense, it makes sense. And to me, in this moment, I think he goes too far because it doesn't feel like it was the correct thing to do in this situation.
Well, so now we're into something I think that's really, really key.
Yeah.
Is that we can have there's two different judgments here. We can have judgments of Indiana Jones. Did you need to do this thing at this moment? The difference is, do we have judgments of Stephen Spielberg making the choice to have the character do it? Like, so for instance, in Braveheart, I judge Mel Gibson for the way the king throws the gay lover out
He's
the window.
He's the director and writer. Right.
I think that Mel Gibson and the way that he filmed that, he chose to make a kind of a comedic moment out of it, which bothers me. Not that the king killed his son's lover. I have no problem with that,
Right.
because that's motivatable within the character.
evil, right.
He's evil. Yeah, he's a jerk. So in this moment, it's like, what? So I guess that's really what we need to talk about is what are we judging here? Are we judging the character of Indiana Jones, or are we judging the film?
I'm judging the character of Indiana Jones.
Totally fine.
Not
Yeah.
Spielberg at all. It has never occurred to me this is a Spielberg decision.
Yeah.
I judge the character. you
Right.
know, so.
Gotcha. But needless to say,
He does.
this is what he does. And-
Absolutely.
And he gets the book and he goes away from her. He doesn't kill her, obviously. And as he's trying to get away, he gets swept up in this crowd.
This is my favorite moment of the movie. Or top 5.
All these people, these kids with their books going up to who? Turn around, Adolf Hitler.
That's so great.
Signing autographs. And there's just this weird moment.
Right.
Where they look at each other and Hitler kind of looks at the book as he's clutching a book and
Right.
Indy figures out what's going on and hands him the secrets to finding the Holy Grail to Adolf Hitler.
I don't even think he hands it to him. Adolf takes it from
Yeah.
him.
'Cause he's just
just
flabbergasted.
assuming.
Yeah. That he wants the autograph. Right. He's just flabbergasted standing there, you know? So for all his talk about Nazis and you goose blah, 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 here he is in front of the face of the Nazis and he becomes a speechless, not fan, but a speechless
What are you gonna
person.
do?
You know, you could punch him, I guess, if you're Indiana. You die, but, you know, you get your shot in.
And Hitler signs the book.
It's so great.
And I love, by the way, that the music drops out at this. It's kind of a quiet moment.
Yeah.
And then he gets the book back and the music starts up again.
Yeah.
There's some great behind the scenes footage of filming of this scene where Spielberg is talking to the extras who are having to do the Heil Hitler sign. And he's like, guys, if you have to do that, you can, you know, if you're directed to do that, you can also have the other hand behind your back with your fingers crossed.
Right.
And then there's a part where he sees the actor playing Hitler. And it's a lighthearted moment, but knowing him as a Jewish man and what he's then going to make years later,
true.
he's looking at him, he's like, God, I just want to punch you in the face so hard right now.
By the way, there is a mean streak to Steven Spielberg that people don't talk about. For all his stuff of his films and the sweetness he makes us feel, Steven can get angry. Steve has the nerd rage within him. And in those moments, you can see windows into that. And I always find that to be a good thing to balance out Spielberg.
Well, I think in this way it relates a little bit to stuff we said about Frank Capra, which is that we all think of Frank Capra as the corny, wonderful Americana guy. Those movies are dark.
Yes.
And that I don't think, like, there is darkness in Jaws with certainly with Robert Shaw, but even with the community that is choosing, you know, their profits over the safety of their beaches. There's darkness in E.T. with what is the nature of that family and the divorce and what is going, and the government. Like there's Close Encounters. There's like, you know, his breakdown in this fight in his wife and the family. There is darkness there. Like, so even in these movies that have these warm messages or are triumphant on some levels, you can't have the triumphant unless you have some dark.
Well, and even Indiana Jones in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's the darkness of hell, of the devil, of the demon, of this kind of thing coming to kill, you know? Yeah.
We're off at the airport. Or the Zeppelin port. And this doesn't ring true to me. We see their pictures are on the papers, on newspapers being handed out
so quickly.
He finds Dad, and they get the first. I love the reveal. We got the first available flight out of Germany, and they walk through as the music builds, and we see that huge Zeppelin, and they're on board. And Indiana Jones says, "We made it." I don't believe that Indiana Jones would say that at all. You're on a German plane. Your pictures of you are everywhere. It seems like this is a problem. Of course, Sean Connery agrees. He says,
when we're airborne with Germany behind us, then I'll share that sentiment.
And then Indy sees the Nazis coming up. And a waiter comes by and Indy follows him around, and the Nazis are looking and checking people's faces. And Indy enters now wearing the waiter uniform. And he's asking people for tickets, both in English and in German.
Such a funny moment.
And our Nazi comes and approaches Dad, who lowers his paper.
Guten Tag, Herr Jones.
And Indiana asks for tickets.
Bestellt, mein Herr. Weg. Tickets, please.
And the guy turns and he punches him in the face and throws him out the window. And to the shocked, looks of all the other passengers, and he says, no ticket. They all pull their tickets out.
Well, there's that great shot of like the main passenger who's a woman, and there's like he says no ticket. They're not necessarily going to speak English, but it's sort of like a rolling wave. Like, oh, this is what he wants. This is what he wants. And she shoves that in the air like, I am good.
Yeah,
don't do that to me.
Please don't punch me. And the plane takes off, or the Zeppelin takes off. I love that it has that little plane on the bottom. And I meant to research if that was a normal thing.
With the Zeppelin, yeah.
With the Zeppelin.
Yeah.
How's the CGI? Do you think the CGI still holds up in this shots?
Well, it's not CGI.
Well, yeah,
Oh, it's not?
No, it's process shots because we didn't have
Oh,
it's not
process
computers.
shots.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's very noticeable.
Yeah, it is, right? As you watch now.
Well, especially when you cut over to them in the plane.
Yeah.
It's very, but I mean, it's charming.
Yeah. By the way, it was warm on the set, and Sean Connery, when it's warm, is interested in his comfort. And since they're shooting from here up, he's not wearing pants. and at first, Harrison Ford is like, "Come on, Sean, put pants on." By the end of the day, Harrison's not wearing pants.
Well, also, Sean Connery said he's a sweater. He's like, if I leave these wool pants on in this hot soundstage,
Yeah.
he's like, they're going to have to dab me between every shot.
This scene is so great. It is such a lovely conversation between the two of them.
Sharing your adventures is an interesting experience.
It's not always shared. It's disgraceful. You're old enough to be her grandfather.
I'm as human as the next man.
I was the next man.
Remember the last time we had a quiet drink? Huh? I had a milkshake.
Wow.
Yeah. And he says, "What are you talking about? We didn't talk. We never talked." I love Dad's response to this is he sits back and he says,
Do I detect a rebuke?
Dad's way of dealing with his son is so irritatingly calm and cerebral. Like it's so off-putting.
Yeah.
It makes it so hard to talk because Indy's saying his next line is he says, "Do I detect a rebuke?" And he says, "A regret." That's exposing an emotion. And when someone exposes an emotion, we think or we hope that the other person will meet us halfway. Mm-hmm. That is not what happens.
It was just the two of us, Dad. It was a lonely way to grow up. For you, too. If you'd been an ordinary average father like the other guys' dads, you'd have understood that.
Dad's response?
Actually, I was a wonderful father.
When?
Did I ever tell you to eat up, go to bed, wash your ears, do your homework? No, I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
Once again, both of them having different narratives about the situation.
Exactly.
Right? And
exactly.
Both of them with narratives that work for them to construct, he's the villain, I'm the good guy, I'm going to be better than my dad. Him constructing, well, I was an absentee father, emotionally absentee father, probably physically, certainly mentally, because I was focused on the Grail. But what that did is it taught you reliance. It's the boy named Sue excuse. I wasn't going to be around, so I gave you this name so you could learn to fight.
Yeah.
It's not really true. I would have rather you be around, and that's the truth here with both these. Plus, you're seeing two different generations of masculinity, right? Which I think is a very important thing to look at here. Indiana Jones, and this is the 80s or late 80s, so which this kind of stuff is starting to creep into the writing of films more and more. This mental health stuff, this idea of talking about, revealing emotions, men revealing emotions in movies, things of that nature. Here's an old school guy like Sean Connery saying to him, look, I did this and I did this. Are you trying to judge me for how I father? I thought I did a great job. And he's like, no, I would have liked to have had, connection with you and talk with you. And so all of that is just two generations of masculinity coming together here. And I enjoy it. And because I think you can see reason on both sides, to be honest with you.
What Sean Connery is saying to him is like, you are the way you are because of how I raised you.
Well, and I think that while the Jones household might have been a very lonely place to grow up,
yeah,
and Indiana Jones is emotionally stunted, I think, in several ways because of it, if he hadn't raised him that way, the Bangkok Palace would have had those 3 stones and kept them, and the Nazis would now have both the Ark and the Grail.
Very good point.
That's what I think.
Certainly possible.
Because it was that self-reliance is what made Indiana Jones who he is, and to some degree, I think his deep desire to please his father on some level.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who'd been dead for 500 years in another country. And I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years.
How many fathers and sons have had these conversations?
Oh, yeah.
Like this, a lot.
I mean, honestly, I respected my dad. I know my dad really cared about me. We did not have an emotional relationship.
Yeah.
It was hard to talk to my dad. There was like 4 or 5 topics that were guaranteed. And I remember like times as an adult where I go, okay, I'm not going to bring up the stock market or Cal football or these other things that I knew I could talk. I'm going to try to talk to him about other stuff.
Actively tried to
have other, and it was really slow going.
Yeah.
It
wasn't until my dad got cancer and diabetes that the walls all came down and we were finally able to connect. But until that moment, there were fights constantly and different. There was judgment. There was all that kind of stuff that lingered for years. And of course, I had to do my own therapy about it. But like, it wasn't until that he met me halfway, as you just mentioned earlier, until he met me halfway, we were able to actually talk about it and find forgiveness and resolution and closure. It would have, if we hadn't had those moments, it would have been I probably would have still be carrying it, to be honest with you.
It's funny. There was a night, so my dad passed away from ALS.
Yeah.
And there was a night where I was with him, and, it's a horrible disease, and he's slowly becoming paralyzed. And he had Ambien to help him sleep. And so I'm lying on, my parents' bed next to my dad, and he's taking the Ambien, and suddenly it starts to hit. And it was like he was on Molly. Like, all of a sudden, my dad was just kind of turned, he's like, I love your mom so much. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's great.
Right.
And he said, I'm so grateful for that. And he just started saying the most loving. And it's not, I don't want to put like my dad was a cold person. It was not that. But it was just, he didn't express himself in that way. And there was like 20 minutes as he was falling asleep of just the most warm, lovely thing. And I told my mom and my sisters, like, you got to go do this. Like, you got to go out. It was something. Because I think all that stuff was there.
Yeah, of course.
It just was in that generation, and he just didn't express it.
It wasn't so.
I love Sean Connery's line, which is, he says,
You left just when you were becoming interesting.
Oof. It's a shot.
well, it's a weird, because it's a shot and a compliment.
Yeah.
It's saying, like, you became an archaeologist and you became very smart, and you were truly, like, I wasn't interested. I mean, there are a lot of people that are not interested in children.
Right.
They're interested in Sean Connery or Henry Jones Sr. only has grown-up conversations. Mm-hmm. So at 19, at 20, suddenly Indiana Jones or Henry Jones Jr. was capable of that conversation. That's when he's out of there.
Yeah.
And then he says, and this is so horrible,
Dad, how well? I'm here now. What do you want to talk about?
Those are always the worst when when they respond like that, because you're like, no, because it's going to feel inorganic and it's going to feel like I'm forcing it to happen. No.
And there's a long pause, and then Indiana Jones says, I can't think of anything.
What are you complaining about?
It's like, we got work to do. And then we move into, and he comes over very excited to have a partner in the quest.
Yeah.
And we go over the 3 challenges. The first is the breath of God, only the penitent man will pass. The second is the word of God, only in the footsteps of God will he proceed. And the third is the path of God, only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth.
I think including this sequence here, this conversation, this moment of this conversation at this point right now, and you two are the screenwriters. I'm not the screenwriter. I think it's brilliant screenwriting.
Me too.
Because this is what will lead to their resolution, their closure, their closeness again, is him walking Indy through these steps like he's telepathically connected to Indy.
100%.
And it is what will bring them together. So to lay this just as they're finishing having this conversation about disconnection between them, it's a great kind of like you mentioned earlier in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the seeds being planted for something that will be paid off later on.
Well, and this is also the type of moment, the preceding moment especially, that people that or the filmmakers that came after this that want to do their version of Raiders of the Lost Ark, their version of Indiana Jones, they want the adventure. They're not thinking about the character moments.
Yeah.
And that's why the movies that ruin Hollywood, that's why they end up ruining Hollywood.
Exactly.
'Cause they're focused on the wrong thing.
Right.
Well, and it's not that you don't want to deliver the adventure stuff, but what gives it the weight, and particularly as you get, because you're setting up perfectly what's going to happen in that final sequence, which is that the connection between the two, this is a movie about these two connecting.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm writing about in my upcoming book about directing is in the really good movies is the character climax coincides with the plot climax. And that's a very difficult thing to do, and a lot of movies don't do it. This one definitely does. But right now, something strange is happening because suddenly we're turning back towards Germany.
What a great shot!
Yeah.
That you see the reflection or the silhouette of the glass
shadows,
and
yeah.
how it starts to move.
Yeah. And we're running through sort of the superstructure inside the Zeppelin, and we climb down onto that biplane. And he says, I didn't know you could fly.
Fly, yes. Clamp, land, no. He actually removes the option of him saying, wait.
And now we're in an old-fashioned dogfight.
Yeah.
And planes are coming up at him, and he's yelling, Dad, 11 o'clock. He checks his watch. 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock.
What happens at 11 o'clock?
And then he goes, 9,
12, 11, 10.
It's so brilliant.
And Dad opens fire and shoots out the tail.
Yep.
Dad, are we hit?
More or less.
Son, I'm sorry.
They got us.
They got us.
Once again, lighting that fire on the ground. Not being, mistake after mistake.
And they crash. But they crash land. Nice landing. And then, and then they're under attack by a strafing run. And he says,
People are trying to kill him. I know, Dad! It's a new experience for me. It happens to me all the time.
I love the hat yanked down. It's the perfect button on that line. It's him going, time to be a man.
and again, this is just inventive filmmaking. It's like they're gonna steal the car from the guy, and you could start the way I would probably conceive it is if I were making this movie is I would go, we're with our main characters, they see the car, they decide to steal the car, and then we follow them as they go and do it. That's not how Spielberg does it. He starts with the guy working on his car at the hubcap, and then the car pulls away. So we're in the guy whose car gets stolen perspective, and that's just much more fun.
And quicker.
And quicker. Absolutely.
This is intolerable! This could be close!
Then we go into the tunnel. The plane foolishly follows them into the tunnel, blasts off his wings. This, by the way, is built on a miniature. The tunnel that they built is big enough for, we could crawl through it. That's how big this tunnel is. And a very, very difficult special effect for the time. Knocks off the wings. Then I love the plane catches up to them.
Oh, my God.
And passes.
The look on their faces as they're
Yes.
passing each other is just brilliant.
Well, and it's amazing how smooth a plane without
I know.
wings
Yeah,
is
yeah,
going
right.
through this tunnel.
What I think that's what makes the joke work is that it's the slowness and the smoothness of the pilot sort of just turning.
Yeah. Just the surrealness of it all, right? Like he's in traffic or something.
And then it explodes and they crash through the explosion. And now another plane is coming up towards them. They run down to the beach and Indy pulls out his gun. Nope, no more bullets. The camera pushes in on Dad. He has a thought. He hands Indy his briefcase, pulls the umbrella like he's drawing a sword, and charges towards the birds, flopping his umbrella and making funny sounds. And the birds all fly up. They crash into the plane, and the plane crashes.
Yeah.
First of all, they couldn't get this to work because seagulls cannot be trained.
Oh.
So they tried forever to get seagulls to do this gag. Couldn't do it. All the birds on the beach are fake. They're just like wooden carvings of seagulls, and they have a bunch of white doves, which you can train in a pit on the beach to let loose to actually have them fly up.
Yeah, there's behind the scenes footage on the Blu-ray of them. I don't know if they were seagulls, but they've got them in boxes, and they take the lids off, and they're kind of shaking, and none of the birds are doing it. And you can hear Spielberg go, "Birds! Birds!" And then he starts laughing.
It just makes me think about the shark doesn't work. The shark isn't working. I mean, Spielberg's been through this.
So used to it.
Yeah.
Of course they don't fly.
Sean Connery's attitude
Oh, yeah.
after this moment, his just confident swagger.
The whistle is great.
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky.
And he just walks past Indy, and the camera pushes in on Harrison Ford's face. And the look on his face says so much.
Yeah.
It's almost a look of just wonder and admiration and like amazement at his father. You know,
Well, and you hear the theme ramp up them too.
Yeah.
it's great. We've arrived at the Republic of Hatay, which I had to look up because I was like, that's a fake place.
Is it Turkey?
It is. We are in Turkey.
Okay.
So Petra, which is and this, the Republic of Hatay was an actual republic that existed from 1938 to 1939.
Wow.
For 1 year. Wow. Right before the beginning of World War II. So this is a real place. There really was a guy there. And Donovan's trying to make a deal, and he's offering riches and gold in order to go search at the place they have to search. And the guy's not paying attention to the riches at all. And looks over and sees the Rolls Royce.
Rolls Royce Phantom 2.
He knows all the specs. And I love the line,
And I even like the color. The keys are in the ignition, Your Highness.
so we've made a deal for that.
Now, did you ever, like, it never occurred to me until I got to be a little bit more of a grown-up, like when they open the chest and they show all these valuables, precious valuables donated
should
by
have
the
said this.
finest families in Germany.
I should have said this.
Those are not donated by the finest families in
right.
Germany. Those
Well,
were
no.
stolen.
Yeah.
They were stolen.
Yep.
Right.
They might have been the finest families in Germany, but they were stolen from Jewish families,
Yeah.
of course. That to me is like the swastika getting burnt off the ark. We're not going to slow down the movie and talking about heavy things like the Holocaust, but we're not going to just pass by it either. You know, just a little thing. We find Elsa, who has a great costume, and this is when we hear that Jones and Dad have escaped. And Salah's with the Joneses.
They set out across the desert this afternoon. I believe they took Mr. Brody with them. Now they have the map.
And in this sort of race, there's no silver medal for finishing second.
Also, they have a tank.
Just, again, Harrison Ford's, he's looking at it with binoculars, like, they've got a tank. I mean, he's never even fought a tank before.
Right.
They originally were going to get an actual antique tank, and then they just decided to build one themselves. So this they built for the movie. We're with Marcus, who is with Donovan and all of them in the car.
Well, Marcus, we're on the brink of the recovery of the greatest artifact in the history of mankind.
You're meddling with powers you cannot possibly comprehend.
Indy and our guys are like up on a ridge, and Donovan sees the reflection of the light in the binoculars, and they tell the tank to open fire. And Indy's just standing there, and Dad says, "Get down," and he says, "Oh, we're well out of range." And the shot goes over their heads and destroys their car.
John Rhys Davies has some great comic moments in this sequence.
yeah.
Like, you see the tire, the flaming tire bounce by. That car belonged to my brother-in-law.
Well, and this is what great screenwriting is like. The main job is to get us where we got to go with our main characters. But giving another character another motivation gets you 3 or 4 more jokes and more little moments. And it also, because this is something we talked about, is like, you got to keep all the characters alive. So we have to have a little line from Marcus. We have to have a little line from Salah in order to keep them active in the thing. So now that this is the brother-in-law's car that got destroyed, Salah has a reason to be active throughout the rest of the movie. They put Brody in the tank. And we see also that who are showing up but the protectors of the Grail. And they open fire. And, of course, our bad guys think that this is Jones. And we get into a tank battle. And our guys say, who are these people? And Jones says, who cares as long as they keep Donovan busy? And the Nazis are attacking with hand grenades, and they honestly start wiping these guys out. We see one of them with a tattoo, and Indy goes after the horses, and Salah says, let's get some camels. It's like, no camels. And Donovan talks to our Grail guy who is now dying, and he asks who he is, and he says,
A messenger from God. For the unrighteous, the cup of life holds everlasting damnation.
Indy jumps down on a guy with a horse and takes him out, which I actually think relates to the beginning of the movie where young Indiana Jones called the horse and jumped and missed it.
Right.
And now he takes a guy out. It's just a little small thing. Inside the tank, Henry shows up to rescue Marcus. They do their handshake.
I mean, this is...
It's ridiculous.
That's an academic fraternity.
Right.
Handshake.
This is nerd cool now in retrospect. But of course, back then you're laughing at them. Now you're laughing with them. And it's so So cool. It's just so cool. Because, I mean, they turn him into such an object of ridicule. To have him have this moment with Henry, I think, is pretty fun.
But, of course, it's not much of a rescue because right after our Nazi colonel shows up.
Yeah.
Search him.
Searches Jones looking for the diary. He slaps him with the glove, asking for the book. Slaps him again, and asks,
What does the diary tell you that it doesn't tell us?
and Sean Connery, man.
It tells me goose-stepping morons like yourself should try reading books instead of burning them. Oh, such a great line.
Yeah.
Colonel! Jones is getting away!
I think not, Herr Donovan.
Not that Jones, the other Jones!
And we see Indy on the horse, and we hear the theme.
And I do think that was a trailer moment.
Totally. Totally. He shows up with Sala and says, I said no camels. That's 5 camels.
Can't you count?
Compensation for my brother's car.
I knew that's why he asked about the camels.
And they ask where Brody and Dad are.
Where's my father?
They have them in the belly of that steel beast.
Great line. And Indy rides towards the tank. By the way, so a couple things about this sequence, in addition to it being great. Very little of it was scripted. Most of it was, again, Spielberg figuring it out with storyboards. These sequences, it's almost like Walt Disney, who, it was the storyboard sessions where the script was really written. And for these action sequences in Spielberg, I think it's the same thing, is it's figuring out all the ideas, not with words, but with pictures. The other thing, and this is a totally silly story. So in the mid-90s, when I moved to Los Angeles, is right when I started to learn more about film and sound, and that is when I bought my first Laserdisc player. Because I realized how terrible I had been looking at all these movies on VHS. And that's when I first started to hear about surround sound. And so in the mid to late 90s, I was like, I want to have a surround sound system. At the Beverly Connection, which is, across the street from the Beverly, the mall, the Beverly Center, there was a stereo store called The Good Guys. And The Good Guys was the best stereo store. And The Good Guys, believe it or not, at this time was open 24 hours a day. And so I used to I would be on a movie shoot and we'd shoot till 3 a.m. or something. And then I was like, I'm wide awake. I can't, what am I going to go do? I need, and so you would go to Cantor's and eat a pastrami sandwich, or you would go do something. I was like, several times I was like, I'm going to go to The Good Guys.
Walk around.
And fantasize about stereo equipment I can't afford. And you know what the stereo, and they have it at Best Buy now too, they have the room where they have all the different speakers and you can choose. The movie that they demonstrated in 5.1 surround sound was this scene from Last Crusade. It was the tank sequence. And I can't watch it without thinking about that's good bass. That subwoofer is really... And by the way, it still is a great sounding scene. Fire! Indy and the horse running from explosions. Inside, we see the shells ejected. Marcus and Brody are covering their ears. Trucks with a whole bunch of Nazis come in. Indy looks back, smiles, turns. The tank turns and turns right into a car. Car flips up, stuck on top of the gun. By the way, this is also the sequence where Indy's hat kept falling off. And we had the joke of him wanting to staple it on in one of the trailers. Guys are trapped in that car, and now the side gun is trying to get a shot on Indy. He leans down, picks up a rock. The big gun shoots that car off of the front. Indy rides up, stuffs the rock in the gun on the side, and through the window POV, we see him riding away, which is great. The side gun gets Indy in its sights, fires, and blows up. And now Indy calls to Dad. Dad, Junior, Dad, Junior. There's no way they could hear each other, in my opinion. And the colonel comes up out of the tank coughing, and here comes Indy. He draws his gun, he fires, he's out of bullets, and Indy rides up a hill and jumps from the horse onto the tank.
Awesome.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And Indy stands up, and again, this is great Steven Spielberg stuff, because we think he's about to fight the colonel, and then he gets tackled by a bunch of other guys, and now he's fighting guys who came in from the side. He shoots 3 guys at once.
With the Luger, right?
With the Luger.
He looks at it, right?
Yeah. Look at the gun. Another guy comes up with a knife, and he thinks he's going to fight that guy, but then he gets grabbed by behind with a chain. He's calling down to Dad, and the gun has fallen down into the tank, and Dad is looking at it. He knocks another Nazi onto the track, who then falls off. We have a little periscope gag, which is the Nazi looks up at the periscope, and Indy's face gets slammed up against it. And then we have the reversal, which is the periscope gets spinned, hitting the Nazi.
Do you know who that Nazi soldier is?
No.
That is Nick Gillard, who would go on to be the stunt and fight choreographer for the prequels. For all the Star Wars prequels.
Interesting.
So you imagine maybe this is where he and George Lucas met for the first time.
There you go.
Yeah.
They force Indy's face down on those treads.
Ooh. Oh, yeah.
Which, by the way, they built different ones. So they had the real ones and on the real tank. And then they also built a light aluminum tank that they could just... didn't have wheels or anything, that they could just move around on the back of a truck. Yeah. And the tracks on that were just made out of soft, like urethane, painted to look like they're metal. So it's not as painful as it looks.
It's good.
Dad is fighting for his gun, grabs something from his pocket. It's a fountain pen, and he squirts the ink in the thing, bringing up another Marcus joke.
Henry, the pen.
What?
Don't you see? The pen is mightier than the sword.
It is truly mightier than the sword.
It's mightier than the sword. Indy falls off the track, and he grabs onto the barrel of the broken side gun, and now they are driving the tank into the side of the cliff with the dirt falling down on his head while Indy hangs on, barely hanging on.
Isn't a strap over it?
Yeah. Strap from his satchel.
Even if he wanted to be untangled, he couldn't.
Well, and I'm sure there's a safety cable keeping him attached to that thing. That he's fine. But that is really Harrison Ford. There are really a whole bunch of guys on the ledge above him dropping dirt on his head. And of course, he sees ahead of him a big rock wall, which means he's going to get crunched. And Dad is fighting inside the thing, and a gun goes off, and the shot ricochets around and kills the driver, who falls on the steering wheel. The colonel falls down. The tank swerves, and up pops Indy with the theme. Dad pops out and says, "You call this archaeology?" Again, that seems like for the trailer to me.
If Henry Jones Sr. and Denholm Elliott would stop quipping, they maybe could have finished the sequence quicker.
And now the tank is heading towards the cliff, and he's fighting with the colonel. And Marcus says, "How does one get off this?" and falls. And Dad gets hit on the track, and Indy catches him with the whip. Does Indiana Jones get stabbed at this moment? It almost looks like he does.
No, he's getting punched in the side. He's getting punched. He's getting kidney punched.
And Dad ends up going off, and then it's Indy and the colonel, and the camera pushes in on Indy as his hat blows off, and then we fall off the cliff. Jax's response to this moment was, "That was totally fake." It's like, look, you're too sophisticated. That was really cool when this movie came out.
I do remember when they have that wide shot of the tank tumbling over, and you can see the little German doll.
Oh yeah.
that is affixed to the tank somehow. It's like,
Totally.
Yeah, okay, yeah, this looks a little fake.
And then I love this moment, which is Dad walks to the edge of the cliff.
Junior! Indy!
And Marcus and Sala are there, and they look down. And the reaction from Sean Connery is just great.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I've lost him. And I never told him anything.
And then his next line is,
I just wasn't ready, Marcus. 5 minutes would have been enough.
what did he not tell him?
Anything.
Yeah.
Could be anything. Could be that he loves him. Could be
he loves him.
I'm sorry for what happened with his mom. Could be more stuff about the Grail.
Yeah.
Could be anything. Could be
some wisdom that he's learned about life.
Sure. But the thing is, he did have those 5 minutes on the Zeppelin.
Yeah.
He didn't use them when he had them. And isn't that the story of life? You think you have the time to say what you need to say or do what you need to do. And then something happens and you're like, oh, if I just had a little more time. It's like, you had that time. You just didn't take advantage of that time. And that sometimes, or most of the time, is the truth in life. You know, you don't savor it till something is gone.
I don't think the this is the first time he had this thought.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think he's thought lots of times, I really need to talk to my son and tell him whatever this is. And that in the moment where he said, we never talk, and he said, do I detect a rebuke? And then he said, go ahead, talk.
Right.
He knew what he wanted to say. And because Indiana Jones was not able to come up with what to talk about, it allowed him to hide a little bit longer and not say the things that he wanted to say.
Right.
Again, it's small moments, but they're really, really good. And while we're having this moment with the three of them looking over the cliff and mourning, we see a root moving and Indy climbing up the cliff, totally beaten and bloody. And we have a shot with him in the foreground and the three guys mourning in the background. And he walks up behind them and he looks down.
Yeah, I love it.
What are we looking at?
It's a great Looney Tunes moment. It's just so brilliant in this moment.
And then at first, like, Henry looks over and sees him, and then he really sees him and embraces him, and it's lovely.
I thought I'd lost you, boy. I thought you had to, sir.
This moment always makes me cry because Indiana does a thing, or Harrison does a thing here that I don't think I've ever seen Harrison do in any other movie, maybe regarding Henry. There's the blink. The blink that he does, he is regressed back to being 10, 12 years old. Because if you watch the beginning of the movie, River Phoenix has that blink. He has a blink moment himself during that sequence with his dad. And that blink, that overt blink that Harrison does is, yes, he's tired, he's exhausted, but it's also the shock of the emotion and the embrace and the something he's been waiting to feel for such a long time. And Harrison Ford has a phenomenal moment as an actor in that, conveying the emotion, because he's surrendering himself physically too as an actor to this embrace, right? He's not going, yes, he's like being taken along with it. And so it's such a great moment.
I think 100%. And I think the word sir is so key.
Yes,
the same thing, because he has regressed to his childhood way of relating to his father.
Yep.
Because now he hasn't called him sir. I don't. Oh no, he did. Did he call him sir after he got hit by the head?
Right.
Yeah, he goes back. Yeah, he goes back
right
to
at the
these
beginning.
moments.
Right.
And then there's a moment with Marcus again, a little comedy bit of him trying to figure out. It's like, look it down, look over it, look down. And then Dad, that's it. We've had our emotional moment. He's like, okay, let's go.
Right.
And Indy collapses, and they just walk away. And he says,
Why are you sitting there resting when we're so near the end? Come on, let's go.
And then we hear the theme as the hat blows back into frame.
Yeah, that's so great. And by the way, he had those 5 minutes back, and he didn't say anything to him other than "I thought I lost you." That's it. Yeah,
that's a great point. No, he didn't. We're with Donovan, and we hear the Grail theme, and we have arrived at the Canyon of the Crescent Moon. So this is a real place called Petra. I would really love to go. It's supposed to be just an unbelievable, ruin, historical landmark.
Well, and there's nothing inside there, right? It's just the front.
No, I think there is something inside.
Okay.
I think, but it's not the cave. Obviously, it's not the Grail caves.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. The Joneses ride up, and they get off their horses, and they walk up, and we're inside, and we hear German voices, and our guys kind of sneak up behind and are watching, and we watch a guy walk towards a cave entrance, obviously scared. He walks by some dead bodies. He looks through the cobwebs. The wind begins to blow, and we see he's holding his sword, and then that sword, something happens, and that sword gets cut. And we see a head roll.
The sickening bounce
Yeah.
of a head.
And then it's time for another volunteer.
Oh.
And then as they're looking this, now we see a gun. And Marcus sees it first, and then they're all captured.
What do you say, Jones? Ready to go down in history?
As what? A Nazi stooge like you.
The Nazis? The Nazis want to write themselves into the Grail legend. Take on the world. Well, they're welcome. But I want the Grail itself. The cup that gives everlasting life. The Grail is mine. And you're going to get it for me.
And he's got a gun, and he's pointing it at Indy. And Indy says, shooting me won't get you anywhere.
You know something, Dr. Jones? You're absolutely right.
So, did he make that decision in that moment to shoot Indiana Jones's dad because of what Indiana Jones said, or was he always going to shoot?
I think he was
Indiana
always.
Jones?
That's what.
right.
I don't know.
It feels
but
that
I
way,
feel like
doesn't it?
I think he had this plan the whole. As soon as he saw them, he knew.
Right. By the way, are you guys bothered by? Remember, Force Awakens got a bunch of crap for feeling like they were tracing the New Hope. All these beats are very, very similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Almost every single thing is very, very similar. With Donovan as Belloc,
right?
The Nazis type of thing, the caravan being tanks instead of the trucks. All the beats are very, very similar into what's happening here. There is some differences, obviously, but you can see shades, kind of like with Force Awakens, shades of A New Hope when you're watching it.
It doesn't, because I think they're different enough. Each Indiana Jones, or rather the first and the third, they both have the two MacGuffins. For Raiders, it's the amulets, then the Ark, and for Last Crusade, it's the Grail Diary and the Grail itself.
Right.
I think it's different enough.
And both of them have the opening thing, which is the idol and the cross of Coronado.
So 3 MacGuffins.
Yeah.
But I think the beats are different enough, and comparing it specifically to Force Awakens, I mean, the fact that a droid lands on a desert planet where a young person finds it, I don't agree with that point. I don't think.
Okay. All right.
The biggest difference to me, I actually like Force Awakens. I
do too.
I don't love it, but I totally like it. It's all about how you feel emotionally. So to me, there are totally structural similarities. We have the Donovan character and the Belloc character who are believers who want to use the thing, use the Nazis, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's similar. Yeah. First of all, it's all done so well.
That's the thing.
Whereas the new killer Death Star, I think, is lame.
Yeah.
Like
again.
And particularly because it's one that's been used twice, so now it's the third time. I think that's really, and it's not that interesting.
Right.
Whereas the Grail is super interesting. And here's the biggest difference, is that while we might be structurally and plot-wise doing some of the things that are similar, emotionally this movie is completely different.
Yes.
And that the Grail has a direct emotional connection to the characters in terms of their backstory, to their relationship going forward. It is emotionally resonant, as opposed to the killer Death Star in Force Awakens, which is like, or whatever they call it, I forget what its name is.
Star Killer Base.
Star Killer Base, thank you. Whatever the hell it is. It's just a plot point. It's just a MacGuffin. Well, and this is, that's not a great movie, and this is I think that's a good movie.
Yes.
This is a great movie. But Dad is shot. He's wounded in the belly, and basically we're like, the only thing that can save him are the healing powers of the Grail.
Well, and to John's earlier point about Elsa, she steps forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
Protesting what Donovan just did.
Yep. And so Indy heads towards the entrance. He walks past the lion statue. We watch his feet as he walks up. He opens the diary, and he reads,
"The breath of God. The penitent man will pass."
And he repeats it.
"Penitent man will pass."
And the camera, by the way, the camera at this moment passes a statue, and that is a statue of the Grail Knight who we're going to meet.
Right.
And Indy looks back at Dad, and he goes in, and he's repeating, the penitent man. And he sees the dead bodies, and now we do a close-up of Dad. Yeah. And what is he saying?
"Only the penitent man will pass. Only the penitent man will pass."
I think the way Spielberg does this is amazing.
The framing of him just off-center, focused on his head, saying it over and over again, just perfect.
Well, and what it's doing, and this is what movies can do that nothing else can do, is it is creating a psychic, telepathic connection between the two people. It just through cuts, just through good storytelling, that they are almost as one mind, almost as Indy is the body and he is the brain, that they are connected, more connected in this moment. You feel as if Henry Jones Sr. is actually seeing through Indiana Jones's eyes in this moment. That's how you feel. And we're repeating the penitent man.
The penitent man is humble before God. Penitent man
kneels before God. They come to the epiphany at the same moment.
Kneels before God.
Kneel! As two circular blades go by, he has to roll. No one said he had to roll. It didn't say the penitent man has to do a good roll. It didn't say that, but apparently he did. And he gets through. And of course, after he gets through, the machine exposes itself. And we see that there's ropes and that somehow this has been built.
I'm through!
We're through.
It's all right.
And Dad shakes his head because we're at the second challenge. The word of God, only in the footsteps of God.
Proceed in the footsteps of the word. The word of God.
No, Henry. Try not to talk.
And he goes, sorry, something occurred to me, which is because we're going to talk about the name Jehovah. Just a month ago, we were doing a movie where a guy was being stoned for saying the name of God. Jehovah, because we did Life of Brian. Jehovah, Jehovah, Jehovah. And we see these letters laid out on the floor, and Indy knows how to do it. And he puts his foot down, and he's about to step on the J.
But in the Latin alphabet, Jehovah begins with an I.
Great little moment of dread as he steps on it and it breaks through. I forget, originally it was supposed to do something else, not break through. They had a different idea, which they filmed, and then they did this of him actually falling through as a pickup because they thought it was more dramatic, but I can't remember what originally was supposed to happen.
Well, also, he catches himself.
Yeah.
So basically, all the letters around him must have been the EHOVAH.
Climbs back up, and he walks through, and he makes it, and of course, Donovan is following. The third challenge. He's come to a chasm.
Path of God. Only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth.
And in the book is an image of a knight walking on air. And Indy's response is, it's impossible. No one can jump this.
Well, it's so funny when he says it's a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And Harrison Ford's expression, because he's not a believer, even though he's seen it in front of him twice.
Yeah.
He's still kind of like, oh, no, not this bullshit again. I remember watching this the first time, summer of '89, and being, how is he going to get past?
Oh, yeah.
How is he going to do this?
And you think he's going to do some cool Indiana Jones maneuver with the whip or the something.
Yeah.
But that's not what he's going to do. And there's just an incredible build of tension with the music, this idea of faith, and you have to have faith. And I think in this moment, that is what Indiana Jones does. He puts his hand over his heart, he closes his eyes, and he's just, it's funny, he's bringing tears to my eyes just thinking about it, is that he's just willing to die. You know, that he's going to, if I die, I die. I'm just going to step into this place. I think this is one of the great deliveries of a moment in film. And it's interesting because we're in an action film with all sorts of exciting, adventurous things. And at this moment, it is a man taking a single step into thin air. And his foot lands on a stone bridge.
Which is belief. Belief. Taking that chance to walk that invisible bridge. And I love when the camera pans around, you're like, it was there the whole time. You were just kind of, in your head, you were caught up with it.
And this is an actual physical matte painting that someone had to paint. And it's, one of the great painters that works at ILM who did all those gorgeous matte paintings that we've seen in Star Wars. And, and that what he had to do was he had to look through the camera, through the lens, and then paint a little bit and look through the lens and paint a little bit so that it was perfectly three-dimensional perspective lined up exactly with this wall. The fact that humans can do these things is just totally remarkable to me, Like having friends who are comic book artists, and I have like some art, I remember, because I can't do any of this at all. And I would watch friends that can draw, and they would draw a line. You're like, there's a line, and another line, and another line, another line, and Wolverine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, how did they know how to do that? And this matte painting of matching the perspective of the wall, it just blows my mind that a human can do it. The guy who painted it, by the way, is Paul Houston. And the camera moves over, and we see the bridge, and the camera moves back, and that bridge disappears. It's amazing. And there's a great reaction from Indy as he walks across, and then he grabs some sand and throws it back on the bridge. Big mistake. And he walks into the cave, and there is the knight kneeling. He's sitting at a book. He raises his head. He grabs his sword to attack, and that sword is so heavy he falls over backwards. This guy playing the knight is just great.
Yeah.
And I don't have the actor's name in front of me. I wish I did. He's awesome.
I knew you would come. My strength has left me.
Who are you?
The last of 3 brothers who swore an oath to find the Grail and to guard it.
This is such a beautiful, beautiful scene because you have the Grail motif coming up in the background, and just sort of this, it's almost like sweet release on his face. Like, finally, I can go.
Yeah. And I love, too, that the way he's made up and lit, he's so gray. Like, the color is so faded from him, everything about him, and all the room is warm colors. So why he is so gray is like so, but it just makes him stand out exactly.
I was chosen because I was the bravest, the most worthy. The honor was mine until another came to challenge me to single combat.
And Indy's like, look, I don't have time to explain, but... And then in walks Donovan and Elsa. And this is when we see that there are a whole bunch of cups.
Which one is it?
You must choose. But choose wisely. For as the true grail will bring you life, the false grail will take it from you.
And Donovan says, I'm not a horse historian. I have no idea what it looks like. Which one is it? And Elsa says,
Let me choose.
And he says, thank you. And she looks. And the knight looks. And Indy looks. And she grabs this beautiful gold goblet with jewels on it and hands it to him. And Donovan goes, oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
And he turns into the light. And he says, it's more beautiful than I ever imagined.
That's Ark of the Covenant stuff. It's so
it's beautiful.
This film is so similar to the first one, but you said, Steve, is a great point. It's just so well done that you forgive it. It's just so well done because they do. It does totally work, and Donovan is so perfect in that way. And this is also a hero / kind of hero moment for Elsa as well, because I think she chooses that cup knowing that it's going to kill him.
I was just going to ask that. Did she pick the wrong cup on purpose?
100%. I 100%
If she's
think she killed it.
an archaeologist, she would know, right?
Yeah. Well, and her reaction when Indy gets the right cup is she's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And there's no confusing these two. They're very, very different.
Right.
The one thing about I think part of the problem with movies that repeat themselves is there's some movies where you're watching it and feeling like, they're doing that thing again.
The Hangover Part 2.
Totally.
Exactly same movie as the first one.
Yeah, Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Right.
Die Hard 2. Like, where it's like, oh, this is the beat where this thing happened that I liked in the first one. If you're thinking that thought, then it's bad.
Agreed.
I never thought this thought until I had seen the movie a dozen times.
Oh, really?
Because I was totally just swept up in the movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The second time I saw it, it was like ding, 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 and I don't care.
I really didn't.
But I didn't care because it was so good. Yeah.
And Donovan goes to this fountain and he draws some water.
This certainly is the cup of the King of Kings.
He fills it. He raises it.
Eternal life.
And he drinks. And he lowers it. And again, it's just, I literally, my note is it's just like Raiders because there's sort of a bait and switch where he opens his eyes and you think it's going to be okay, and then the music turns creepy and he has a reaction and he turns to Elsa, and first he's just subtly older with makeup.
What is happening to me?
And he grabs Elsa, and then his hair grows out. He screams.
Her reactions are great. Her screams.
And his eyes sink in, and then he's trying to strangle her, and now he's full skeleton, and Indy pushes him away, and he just explodes into dust. And the last thing we see is the Nazi symbol. That's the only thing that survives. And what does our knight say?
He chose poorly.
A meme that still survives.
Yeah.
You see it on Twitter all the time.
All the time.
Which I did look up. The Grail Knight is an actor named Robert Edison, and he passed away 2 years after Last Crusade was released.
Oh, wow.
And also the German colonel, I don't mean to digress for quick, but the German colonel, his name is Vogel.
Of course.
We'll just leave that out there.
Wouldn't you know it?
By the way, this effect was done. The first is makeup, and then there are 3 puppets built out of Donovan, which they sort of morph between. And this is the very early days of having this morphing technology.
Yeah, kudos to Alison Duty for screaming like that through all that stuff. Because it was well done.
Oh, and the final skin decay of the puppet, they built this material, and then they blew it off with hot air and time lapse. And that's what made that skin sort of fall off the way it is. Now Indy looks at the cups, and he says it would not be made of gold. And he reaches behind one of them and pulls out this very plain cup and says,
That's the cup of a carpenter.
And grabs it, and he goes, there's only one way to find out. And he goes to the thing, and he drinks, and there's no ceremony. Like, just like, boom, I got it. Because he's here to save his dad. He's not here to have a religious experience.
Yeah, there's a time,
And he drinks, and the knight says,
You have chosen wisely. But the Grail cannot pass beyond the Great Seal. That is the boundary and the price of immortality.
By the way, I feel bad for the Grail Knight. He's waited 700 years for someone to come along and replace him.
Right.
And he thinks in this moment, here's the dude, and now I can finally rest. And we go outside, and Indy brings the cup to Dad, who's dying, and he gives Dad a sip, and Dad drinks, and then he pours it on the wound, which smokes, and Dad gasps. Again, Sean Connery's acting is just great in this moment. And we see the wound wash away, which is just a practical effect.
Yeah.
And Marcus is deeply moved, and Dad takes the Grail and looks at Indy, and this is what's so amazing about the film, is that Dad's life was to find this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the quest, he finds his son.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
That's what that is what the journey of the Grail has led him to his relationship with his son.
Well, that was his Holy Grail for real.
The
right?
real,
'Cause the
what he
Holy
really
Grail-
needs.
Right,
Yeah.
the one he really needs.
Yeah. And I really think that that's all in Sean Connery's performance.
Well, the Holy Grail has always symbolized understanding. Remember, even in Excalibur, it's the king is one with the land is the king. It was he needed to remember that again in order to become a stronger king or become stronger again. Same thing with Henry Jones. He had to remember his relationship with his son, the love he had for his son, in order to be a better man.
And Salah's got a gun on the Nazis, and we get rid of all of them, and we're getting up, and then Elsa grabs the Grail.
We have got it. Come on.
And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm certain that she made this guy drink.
Yeah.
I think this is what makes her believe that she's now on the side of good.
Mm-hmm.
That she took out the bad guy, so now she's one of them. And she's like, hey, we're all together, and we've gotten the Grail.
Elsa, don't move.
She crosses that seal, and the room starts to shake. By the way, the sound of the room shaking, this is rubbing on rubber balloons. You know, like it makes that kind of sound. That's the sound of that. And for the boulders, they actually just grabbed a bunch of boulders, hauled them up above the hill at Lucas Ranch, and rolled them down the hill. This chasm opens up as this whole room is breaking apart. There was 10 gimbals, which is things that can move pieces of the set individually. When you wanted to do take two, you pushed a button, and it was a 20-minute reset. And the set would all come back together, which reminds me of theme parks, you know, totally how theme parks work. And the Grail falls down into the chasm, and Elsa is hanging there, and Indy slides down and grabs her, and she sees the Grail, and she reaches for it.
Don't, Elsa. Elsa. Your other hand, honey, I can't hold you.
I can reach it.
The maniacal look on her face.
Oh, yeah.
The obsessive sound she
Yes,
made.
yes,
Yep,
right?
Yep.
This is also reminiscent, I think, of Raiders as well. This desire, this overwhelming desire, the power to have this. When your impetus is evil, these religious artifacts show you that.
Well,
show you that.
Here's where I disagree. I mean, because that's Indy. How much risk did Indy put himself in to recover all these things?
Sure.
You know, he's always been the person who's like literally has no plan, wading into snakes and Nazis and whatever it is to get the thing that he needs to get.
But to him, to get them is to put them in a museum so they can be appreciated by other people. The selfish desire for power.
Agreed.
It's never been for power, right?
Well, do you think her desire is for power?
Absolutely. I think that's the reason she wants it. And look, she's young. I think this has got to be really stressed. She's young. That's why she thinks, oh, if I can use these people, I'll get what I want. Yeah. Now that she's done this thing, she's like, oh, now we're all together. That's the thinking of youth. That they think, oh, it's, you know, as long as we get what we get, that's all that matters. But in reality, there's more that matters. And in that moment, she has that choice. And Indy is so sweet to her. Honey, he says honey.
Yeah.
Like that's a term of this. He had just put this woman against a wall by the neck a few minutes ago, but here he is understanding himself, like this, the weight of this situation. So he wants her to survive.
Well, and forgives on some level. Like absolutely. I think he has forgiven her on some level. By the way, another important life lesson that I think we should discuss is don't wear gloves.
Truth.
Because he's holding onto the glove and the glove is slipping out.
Yeah.
And he calls her one more time and she's trying to reach for it. And then the glove slips out and she screams and falls, and Indy falls. And now it's Dad who grabs Indy. And Indy is reaching for the Grail. And Dad says,
Junior, give me your other hand. I can't hold on.
I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad.
it's so perfect because literally he is now in the position of the person that he just And yet, what does it mean to give your father the thing that he quested for at the entire time of your childhood when you had no connection to him?
Right.
I mean, he wants to. What does Indiana Jones want to be? He wants to be his father's son,
right?
Even though he doesn't want to be Junior.
And they never give him a maniacal face in this moment either, like they did with Allison. He's reaching from a desire to really get this for his dad. Yeah,
and he reaches, and then his dad says,
"Indiana."
That's such a moment, man.
Oh,
just one word.
Yep. And then he says, "It's getting me all teared up right now."
Indiana. Let it go.
And there's a pause. And then Indiana looks up and he reaches up and he grabs Dad's hand. And we hear a softer version of the theme. And Dad looks up. And as he pulls Indiana Jones up, he sees the Grail Knight who salutes.
Beautiful moment.
It is because you spend decades hunting the Grail. You don't know if the Grail's a real thing, if it really exists. All of your work is based on the faith that this is true.
Right.
And even though he doesn't get the Grail, he drinks from the Grail and he sees the Grail Knight. And that, in a way, fulfills the quest, because it's real. And this is where I just want to take a moment because it so relates in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was willing to sacrifice Marion to get the Ark. And now he lets go of the Grail. And this is why thematically this movie is so deep. It has so much more kind of to say. Because in the end, the thing is, I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. It doesn't make me cry.
Right.
It's just a thrilling, amazingly, beautifully put together adventure. This one does.
Yeah. His father's on stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and look, the two people who drank from the cup are the ones who achieve the right understanding. Right. And that's important too.
Well, and when Belloc opens the Ark, he's doing the right ritual, but his heart is in the wrong place.
Exactly.
I wonder if Donovan had drunk out of the right cup, would it have accepted him? Because remember, the Grail Knight says for people who don't have the right reasons, it means damnation or whatever.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones didn't get the Grail for the Grail.
Right.
He get the Grail because he wanted to save his father.
Right.
We're outside. They exit as there's smoke coming out of Petra, and Dad walks up to Indy and says,
Elsa never really believed in the Grail. She thought she'd found a prize.
And he says,
What did you find, Dad?
Me. Illumination.
And then he smiles. And are we ever going to know what that means?
We decide that for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, certainly he called his son Indiana.
Yep.
That's part of it. That's a piece of it. And they mount up on their horses.
And I love the irony that he's the one that tells Indiana to let it go.
Yeah.
When he had been pursuing it for so long.
Yeah.
And what did you find, Junior?
Junior? Dad? Please, what does it always mean? This Junior?
And now we finally get to, what is this? What is Solace's? What does this mean, this Junior?
That's his name. Henry Jones Jr.
Like Indiana.
We named the dog Indiana.
The dog? You're named after the dog?
Got a lot of fond memories of that dog.
What I really wonder is, so just to take a moment with this.
Yeah.
So how old is River Phoenix when we meet him? 16? 15?
I was going to say, 14, 15.
His friend calls him Indiana. So he's already taken this name. At what age was and the dog is in the room.
Yeah.
So at what age did he decide he wanted the same name as his dog?
That's a good question.
So his mom dies. He's totally disconnected from his father. Right. There's no love in his house whatsoever. And the dog is named Indiana. I think that's his closest relationship on some level.
Yeah.
And he just goes, I'm Indiana too. It's just such a, I mean, like having an 8-year-old who has changed his name several times.
Right.
And and has had imaginary friends and all those things. It's like I just picture, but for whatever reason, Indiana Jones, he just kept it.
I always thought it was because the dog had a stronger relationship with his dad than he did.
Oh, sure.
So to co-opt that name to try to maybe develop that relationship too.
I think that dad would touch his dog and pet him. And
right. like name recognition, Indiana.
He would call out to the dog,
Right.
and he's like, well, I'm coming too.
Yeah, well, I'm coming too.
And the dog would wag his tail and get a pet, and Indiana would come up and he would make him count in Latin.
Yep. Very good point.
Ready?
Indy, Henry, follow me. I know the way. Ha!
Got lost in his own museum, huh?
Uh-huh.
After you, Junior.
Yes, sir.
And he gallops off with the theme, and they catch up to Marcus, and they literally ride off into the sunset. And we never heard what Indy got when he drank out of the cup.
Right.
Because we got on the Junior thing. So we don't ever get to know.
You got 2 more sequels. That's what he got.
It was the highest grossing film of the year with $474 million. Wow. It had serious competition, by the way, because it's 89, which is the year of Batman 89.
Mm-hmm.
It wins 1 Oscar for sound effects editing. That's all I got. You ready to go to final thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
Who'd like to go first?
Sure, I'll jump since you guys are the bigger fans of this stuff. I will say this. I absolutely love this movie. It's one of my favorite. It's my favorite one of the series because of the father-son stuff. You know, we've touched on it so many times throughout our recap of this movie or review of this movie or revisit of this movie, and I really enjoy the power of that. The Grail, to me, is almost just a side thing. It's more about their relationship, their exploration. And what Spielberg has done here with screenwriter, with Kasdan, is find these incredibly lighthearted moments within all this insane action. And the best movies never remove the actual stakes of what's happening here. The Nazis, the possibility that they could be, you know, taking over the world. All of this, you never lose all of that while you're also having these brilliantly beautiful moments and funny moments with these characters. And one of the things I've always felt after when I watched the movie now as an older person was it didn't matter what cup it was. It mattered what his heart was.
That's what I think too.
Right. Yeah. And when I first watched it, I thought, oh, that's brilliant. Of course, it's going to be a carpenter's son's cup. Of course, he's not going to need attention, blah, blah, blah. But then as I've gotten older, it's like those cups don't appear till they walk into the room. So to me, I'm like, oh, interesting. And so I love that you can still rediscover things about the great movies that we've said over and over again. And this is one that still pays benefits every time you watch it. And it's so weird to be in that transition place where you start to feel connected more to Henry Jones Sr. than you do Henry Jones Jr. And that's been one of the gifts of a film like this.
How about you?
Yeah, I go back and forth between which of the Indiana Jones films I prefer, Raiders or Last Crusade. But it never, even when I'm on my Raiders kick, it never diminishes my love for Last Crusade. I mean, to me, this was such a great trilogy of films. I really wish the 4th one had turned out better. If they end up doing a 5th one, as it's starting to look a little probably doubtful. When people ask, like, what movie would you take to a desert island? I think even when I'm on my Raiders kick, I would still say Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Wow.
So, as I said, I'm writing this book, and one of the main themes of this book is the idea of story, these definitions of story and plot, some of which comes from Stephen King. And the basic idea, the sneak preview, is that plot is the external conflict and story is the internal conflict and the evolution of characters over time. And one of the ideas of the book is that the main thing that draws us into most movies is story, is that often we think it's the plot. We think it's about the shark or the aliens invading or whatever it is, but most of the time it's actually the characters and their interactions, interpersonal relationships, internal conflicts, and so on. And there are some movies, like Back to the Future being one and Raiders of the Lost Ark being another, which is you're really watching the plot. Is that while there is an emotional story with Marion Ravenwood, we're not really going to deal with it very much. We're really not going to resolve it very much, not in a deep way. And so in terms of if I just look at the action sequences and inventiveness itself, I like Raiders better. I like the truck sequence better than I like the tank sequence. I like the opening of Raiders, I think, is a better sequence than the River Phoenix sequence. So, like, just in terms of technical stuff and the what happens, the plot-oriented stuff, I like Raiders better. The reveal of the Nazi with the burn on his hand, that's better than any reveal that's in Last Crusade. But the story of Last Crusade, the father and son, and the resolution of their relationship, how we introduce the conflict and how we resolve it at the end of the film, and the way, as I said before, that resolution coincides perfectly with the plot resolution, has an emotional component that Raiders doesn't. So it's no disrespect to Raiders. It is literally one of my favorite movies of all time, and I will sit down and watch it right now. But in terms of having emotional resonance, I think Last Crusade wins. So that's what we think of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Of course, we always want to hear what you think. Take a visit to our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. You can subscribe to the show on YouTube and iTunes and iTube and
yes, and the Book of Face. Yeah.
And the Book of Face.
You can search for us on Yahoogle.
On Yahoogle
and Spotify.
Please leave your reviews on whichever one of those takes them. You can support the show on patreon.com/the Cine-Files, where you can listen to our Cine-Files shorts and also pick movies that we're going to review in the future. You can buy Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade or stream it through Amazon Prime just by visiting our website, cinephiles.net. In fact, you can buy and stream every single movie we've ever reviewed there, as well as listening to our episodes there. And you can contact me on Twitter at SRMorris, on Instagram at SRMorris1. John, how about you?
You can always find me at The Roca Says on Twitter and on Instagram. See all the things I'm doing over there on the Outlaw Nation YouTube channel. Please check that out as well. Got that Mornings with the Outlaw show, doing it every morning at 8:30 a.m. Monday through Friday, talking about all kinds of things, entertainment. Go to www.youtube.com/John Roca Says. Subscribe to that with all the content coming down the pike.
And Shannon, if people wanted to reach you, how would they do it?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Shannon_McClung, on Instagram at Shannon the Geek Buddy. You can hear me every week with John Roque and Michael Vogel on our podcast, The Geek Buddies.
Yeah.
And if you would go to my Facebook fan page, I always feel icky saying this, but if you would go to my Facebook fan page, facebook.com/Shannon McClung fan page, and give it a like, my representation would appreciate it. And I was just on 2 shows, on Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Goldbergs. One episode is Captain Kim for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Dave Kim's Party for the Goldbergs. I just realized that they both had the last name Kim.
Wow.
Interesting. Those are both on Hulu and streaming on their respective sites.
And if you want to follow the show itself, you can do so at Cine_Files on Twitter and the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. And I think that is it for this week. We will be back next time with another great film on the Cine-Files.